Okay, cool. So this is very similar to the talk that I gave in Costa Rica about contributing to Nostr as a non-developer. And what I want to do, and this is going to be on the basic side of things on purpose. If you want some super technical content, the other room is over there. But this, I wanted to go through just generally how Nostr works from the ground up to give people just a better understanding of like how the thing functions and why it's so cool and why it's so unique. And then talk about ways that people who don't have the ability to write code can still contribute to the Nostr protocol. All good?
Make that wireless sound any better. Can you use this mic, please? Check.
Better?
Yeah. Close to the mic, please.
Yes, here, on my chin. All right. Okay, so yeah, the idea here is we're going to go through some basic stuff, and then we will, from there, look at how we're going to contribute to Nostr as a non-developer. So my name's Jeff G. I have been working on Nostr full-time since about February. I work on a couple different projects, one called Lister, which is kind of a list management tool, another one called Ostrich Work, which is a little bit like by itself, hasn't been touched in a little bit, but it's a job posting board. More specifically, or more generally, I guess it's a classifieds listing site. And then I help a lot on NDK with Pablo. So this is for really anyone who wants to contribute to Nostr in some way, and specifically for obviously people who are non-technical. I think too many people often think, okay, I actually can't do anything because I don't, use GitHub. I don't know how to write code, so I'm kind of stuck here just, shit posting or zapathoning. And I think that that's just totally incorrect. And a great example of this is another project I do called Nostr.how, which is very much dependent on people writing content and translating that content, actually more importantly. And so it's now up to about 10 languages, I think. And all those translations have come from other people, and none of that work is technical. Once you get the pattern of how that translation file looks like, it's actually very simple. Okay, so I've already kind of talked about this. We'll skip over that. So how does the Nostr protocol work from the ground up? It is a protocol, which means it's nothing but an agreed-upon way to transmit information. We have lots and lots of protocols. They're all arcane. People don't really know what they are, but you use them every day when you use the internet. Things like HTTP, those are just protocols. And that's all it is really just instructions on how to transmit information. Events are the sort of atomic unit of Nostr. Everything is an event. Every event is just nothing more than a little JSON object. JSON is definitely not the most efficient, or you can argue whether it was the best choice, but at the same time, it's incredibly simple, it's human readable, and it's about the most common data structure on the planet at this point. Most APIs use it. Almost every developer, is very comfortable and familiar with it. There's plenty of tools around it. And in Nostr, the kind field is the most important one because that's the one that tells you what you're dealing with. So this is what an event looks like. This is what JSON looks like. You can see it's very readable. You've got keys and values. The keys here, are content, created at, ID, kind, and then you've got the value after, which tells you what it is. And in this case, you've got a kind 1, which is a note. Kind 0 is your metadata, and there's ranges of all of these event kinds, and it keeps going up from there, kind of to infinity, really. So you can always tell what kind of event you're dealing with by looking at the kind, and then from the kind, you then know, okay, the rest of the data in this JSON object is going to look how it's supposed to look, or if it doesn't, then it's non-standard, or it doesn't work, it's broken. This is what a metadata field looks like, or a metadata event looks like. This is what a zap event looks like. They get a little bit bigger. Some of the events have kind of weird special properties, like some are replaceable, some are not replaceable, some are ephemeral. So the idea behind how Nostr works really kind of functions on this idea that different ranges of events do different things, and you can always create new events to do new things that you want to do. The NIPs, everybody talks about NIPs. Everybody loves to talk about NIPs. But the Nostr implementation possibilities is sort of how developers decide how to move the protocol forward. There's only one required NIP, and that's NIP number 1. And that's the original one Fiat Jaff wrote that basically just describes, hey, it's a JSON thing. Hey, here's how the event is supposed to look. This kind thing is really important. And he describes just the basic interaction between how that data goes to a relay and how you ask relays for that data as a client. These are not for feature requests in a sense, right? Like they're not things specific to any one client. The implementation possibilities is sort of just like guidelines. And in fact, other than number one, every other NIP is optional. So like every client doesn't have to, or every relay doesn't have to implement all of them. They only implement the things that they actually need to do whatever they want to do. Anyone can create or update or change NIPs on the Git repository. It's a completely open repository. That said, I think, and this is like one difference from the talk I gave in Costa Rica, that repo is very busy now. There are a lot of things happening in it, and that will continue to be the case. Like it'll get worse and worse over time, I'd say. So it's actually a really good idea that if you are technical and you're thinking about like how I want to do something, it's mostly a good idea to try and go implement what you're doing somewhere yourself, flesh it out, talk with other developers, figure out what the actual thing that functions properly is, and then put a NIP together and put it into the NIP repository. Because then you can have a productive conversation rather than a lot of times you get like a feature request into the NIPS repository and it immediately is closed and no one looks at it. So I guess if this, as a non-technical kind of audience, these are less important, but you can go to the NIPS repository always, and there's a really good kind of overview of all the different kinds of events, what they're for, and it gives you a little bit more information about how stuff functions. Okay, this is like the network itself. So events and how the protocol functions are very, very low level. Most of the uniqueness of Nostr actually comes from the network and like how that network is built. And so we'll go through a really very abridged kind of history of computing. First we had computers that didn't talk to each other, and then somebody got a cable and they plugged the two computers together and they went, oh my God, it works. This is amazing. Then they started plugging all the computers together, and it was mostly fine, but it didn't really work very well, and it certainly didn't. It led to like a lot of complication, and that immediately started to leading towards centralization, because what you needed was a very strong computer, a very powerful computer, to be able to be ready to serve requests to lots of other computers that were trying to connect to them. And so that's where this sort of client-server model came from. And mostly because of just the constraints of how powerful computers were at the time, those servers, that was a powerful centralizing force. The people who ran servers became businesses, and then those accrued more and more power. And especially in network effect businesses, those businesses could accrue a ton of power. Now, you probably all can imagine if one of these centralized servers goes down, you get the fail whale on the Twitter site from years ago. Centralized servers are a point of centralization, so they're a point of failure. But they also are a point where they're a choke point. A centralized server can decide who is allowed to connect and who is not. And if you, as developers, you are in kind of the Web 2 world, you're always building to APIs. And those APIs are controlled by third parties. And we've seen over the years many instances, Twitter probably being one of the more famous ones, but just recently Reddit did this as well, where they just turned off their API on all their developers. And so it's one of those things where you could build a very successful business, but if you are beholden to some API and that gets turned off, someone has the power to just kill your business in a flick of a switch. So there's that problem as well with centralization. So how does Nostr get around this? Nostr uses, obviously, relays and clients. You've heard lots about that. I think if you use Nostr for even a little bit of time, you start to just sort of understand this in a more visceral way when your client is connecting and disconnecting from all these things. But visualizing it this way, I think it is actually really helpful, and it makes it clear how simple this is. There's a lot of decentralized protocols out there that try to get very fancy and very clever about how they do the decentralization. Nostr takes a complete opposite approach and just says we're going to be as simple and as dumb as possible here. We're going to have loads of databases spread around the place. You can connect to one or many, and all you do is just ask them for data, and they send you data. They're very simple, straightforward servers, and they don't necessarily have to have some sort of synced-up global state. And if you think about it, that actually is, in and of itself, is very unique. I think, when you go to Twitter, yes, you're getting an algorithmic feed, but you sort of have this mental model in your head that you have the global state by looking at Twitter. And if you turn it on to chronological mode, if you could somehow follow everybody on Twitter, you would get the fire hose of the same thing that everybody else is seeing. That's really not true, and it's like especially not true in Nostr. Your global feed in Nostr is not, my global feed in Nostr. And what relays we connect to really does shape, what we see and what our interactions can be. So this is both a, durable situation because, in this sense, if one of these relays goes down, you've still got other relays you're connecting to. Now, the guy in the middle here, the client in the middle, since he's only connected to that one relay, he's now, oh, actually, he's on two. Never mind. So, if you're connected to one relay, obviously that's just like a centralized model. But in this case, you're connected to more. I guess the one thing here to keep in mind, though, is that now the client on the left and the client on the right can't talk to each other. They now don't have an interface between them, and they aren't connected to the same thing. And this is something that we still need to solve properly. At the moment, we have ended up with several very large relays. Snort, Damas, Nostr Band. Like there's several large relays that most people connect to, or most people in the kind of, I guess, Western world of Nostr. I think it's been really cool being here and seeing how we've almost got like a parallel universe in Japanese Nostr because they use very different relays, and obviously the content is a completely different language, and so you end up with this bifurcation of the network, which is actually really healthy and kind of mimics what real life is more like. But we do need to solve this. We need to make relays, make it much easier for clients to understand where they need to go to get data and to be able to dynamically kind of connect and disconnect from the relays that make sense for what they're trying to do. Okay, we just went over that. So I think we actually covered most of this in what I just talked about. But yeah, again, there is no singular network view. Like the universe view in Damas is not like the entire thing. And I think it is very helpful to continue and try to keep that in mind because what you connect to sort of shapes exactly what you're going to see. I keep using the term client and server. That's, I guess, a very technical programmer way of talking. Clients are just apps. Like all the apps on your phone, the websites that you go to, those are all clients. And the client is, I guess, the best way to think of it is they're the client going to get data or going to get information or doing stuff on your behalf. So think about it just as apps. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Like I said before, clients don't have to implement all the NIPs. They implement a subset for whatever use case they're trying to do. And I think one of the amazing things is the difference between this talk that I did in Costa Rica, which was in March, which was very early, and we had mostly the Twitter clients at that point, but we didn't have a lot of other stuff. In the last 6-7 months, there's been an absolute explosion of the other stuff category. Really basic apps like Lister, which is another stuff category, but I was just on a panel with Arcanox, who's building a metaverse that is thermodynamically consistent on Nostr, which is bananas. Like it's a 3D world you can move around in, but you've got to expend proof of work to do that moving around. So this other stuff category, I imagine, is going to be 99% of Nostr eventually. Yes, we'll always have the social or the notes contents or notes apps, but the other stuff, when it clicks, that Nostr can actually rebuild pretty much anything on the internet, and a whole lot of stuff that we couldn't build on the internet. Then you start to get the power of what this thing actually is. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that bots can also be clients. And so I think we've all probably interacted with the GPT-3 or 4 bots that are roaming around in Nostr. Those are kind of special clients in the sense that they are also talking to relays and doing things, but they're sort of autonomous in that way. And that's pretty cool. DVMs take this huge step forward in the sense that you've got these agents out there that can do stuff on your behalf just by you asking for things. So I think, again, we've not really scratched the surface of all the other stuff that Nostr can do, but it will definitely be the biggest category over time. And then you've obviously got the users. And users are both humans and computers here. But the humans aspect here is by far the messiest in the whole network, right? Humans are always the messy bit. And so, I think, again, both from a perspective of we're not great at being very predictable like computers are, but also from the point of view of the censorship resistance aspects of things, and how different people value content or value different things about a given network or a given social group. Like Blue Sky is much more leaning towards kind of a more sanitized, we're going to control what is put out here and that sort of thing. Nostr is like just total chaos, and I love that. Not everybody does. I think Pablo's point yesterday about embrace the chaos is pretty valid. Like if you want to contribute and you want to be a part of Nostr, you sort of have to embrace the chaos. And we do need to build better tools for this. I think it's totally fair to say like lots of people don't want to see naked people every time they open up their Nostr client, and that's fine. That's great. We just need a tool to control that. And so things that don't work well now can easily work really great in the future, but we have to build all those things still. Another thing that is incredibly important, but it's also an area where we've made an absolute mountain of progress in the last couple of months, is the tooling and the infrastructure around how stuff on Nostr gets built. I think we had a very early kind of tooling library called Nostr Tools that Fiat Jaff wrote at the beginning. And that has sort of expanded into higher level libraries like NDK and the Snort system, and stuff that developers have sort of gone, okay, this is a repeatable thing we're going to have to do lots and lots of times here. Let's make this much easier. And I work a lot on NDK, so that's probably the one I'll talk about a lot more. But these sorts of tools are incredibly important for bringing new developers into the space, but also making it much easier to build apps clients a lot faster and more easily, and to do it in a way that is not centralizing. That's actually, I think, the biggest thing about NDK that I really like is that Pablo, the idea behind it when we first started writing it was literally, I want to make sure that the patterns that we build into these apps aren't centralizing, because the easy way is always centralization. Connecting to four relays, and that's just the end of it. It's much more difficult to then say, okay, when you log in, fan out, find all of your followers, find all of their relays, group all that stuff, figure out which relays are functioning and which aren't, and then every time you publish a note, figure out which grouping of relays or groups of relays that you need to send that, publish that event to. That stuff is actually really complicated, and it's good that we do that one time and we do it once really, really well. Okay, I think I've covered a little bit of this Nostr Beyond Social. I think it is really, like I said, it will be by far the largest chunk of Nostr. I really do think that like Fiat Jaff's original Nostr doc still stands, really, really well. He talks down about it all the time, but I think it actually proves the point out really well. He built it for simplicity, or he designed it for simplicity. He wanted to make sure that it had a chance of working, and he wanted to make sure it was open from the beginning. So I very highly suggest going and reading that, and just like browsing through the NIPS library. Like you might not understand all the technical stuff, but I think having that understanding of like why things are built the way they're built, and starting to try to get a concept of that in your head is really helpful for understanding how you might want to contribute or what the best way you can contribute is. Okay, so now we're to the part where we talk about what Nostr needs and where you can help. So as a non-technical person, I talk to a lot of people who are like, I'd love to contribute, it'd be really great, I wish I could write code. There's so much stuff that doesn't require writing code. Writing code is actually a much smaller piece than I think a lot of people think it is. Yes, it takes time, and like as these apps and clients and relays get bigger and more complicated, and it does get more complicated and slower to build things, but it's all the stuff around the edges that actually makes these experiences really, really great. So we'll go through a few of these different large categories of things that you can work on. This is obviously not an exhaustive list. There's plenty of other ways. I guess, like from a very high level perspective, though, it's like this is a permissionless system. Like you don't have to ask permission from anybody to do anything. Like go to a GitHub, go to GitHub for now. Hopefully we'll get a replacement soon. But like go to GitHub, create an account if you don't already have one, and it's okay to like just go in and ask a question, or like create an issue on someone's repo. Like there's no harm in that whatsoever. And I think too many people kind of just hesitate and are like, oh, I don't want to bother someone, but like, it's fine. They'll either ignore you, they'll just close your thing if they don't actually want to talk to you, or they'll probably respond to you and you probably will start a conversation. So that's kind of the very first one, is just kind of QA and bug reports. Developers try to think of like all the different ways their apps are going to be used, but they're certainly never going to get all the edge cases, and they're certainly never going to run into all the bugs because they don't have everybody's different phone and in everybody's different locations. So it's a really good thing to send feature requests and bug reports to developers. So if you find something weird, like, tell the person. And I think that that both helps us make the experiences better, but it also is that point of starting conversations. And especially for the kind of bug report aspect, I think it's mostly about just making those experiences much better. Filing good bug reports is a totally different thing, though. So it doesn't help a developer if you're like, hey, Damus keeps crashing. Will's like, okay, cool. What you want is you want somebody to say, when I do this thing, I can make it crash, and I can do it repeatably. A repeatable bug is like the best thing in the world, because then you have a hope of fixing it really quickly and easily. So if you find something that goes wrong, if you've got the time or you have the energy for it, like, try and make it happen again. And if you can, then you've got a repeatable bug, and that's a really easy thing to get fixed. So when you go to file a bug report, usually developers want the bug reports where the code is. So if that's GitHub, you want to go to GitHub, you want to create an issue. If it's one of the other like code repository sites, that's probably where it needs to go. I guess at a worst case scenario, you can just send a message to the developer or to the account that it's under. What you do want to do, though, is give people detailed descriptions. Like, write all the random details that you think may or may not matter, right? Like, what type of device is it? Were you on the web? Were you on your phone? Like, what's the phone? What version of the app, if you can find it within the app itself, are you using? Those sorts of things help with that reproduction aspect and give the developer a lot of context. If you do those sorts of things, those are the bugs that get fixed first. Like, if you go into a giant list of bugs and there's like a bunch that are kind of spotty, hardly any details, you're like, I don't even know what this is referring to, you kind of just skip over that and go straight to the thing where you're like, okay, I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on here, and I'm pretty sure I can fix this. Okay, moving on. So I guess another one is, well, actually, I'll take one quick kind of stopover to talk about feature requests. Everybody that ever uses a product has some sort of request. Like, there's something you want it to do that it doesn't necessarily do. And feature requests are great. I guess it's just a good idea, in the same way that you think about bugs, is to take a step back for a moment and think about, like, okay, what am I trying to do? Like, what's the actual problem I'm trying to solve here versus I want X? Because telling a developer I want X, sometimes they'll just implement it that way, and that's okay. That can be okay. But telling them what you're actually trying to do is much, much more helpful for them to like try and think of, like, okay, what's an actual solution to this problem versus here's this feature request I have to implement. And I think in that way as well, you kind of are giving developers an idea of a class of problems that need solving, or a class of features that need to be built, rather than just, I need this one like toggle somewhere. And that sort of leads us into this product and design aspect. This is a really great place to contribute. I'm like we did not have Nostr.design with Carnage and everything back at Costa Rica. I think Carnage was working on things, but that group has expanded, and they're spending full-time energy on helping all the devs make sites and apps and clients that are both nice to look at, but much more importantly, that work properly and that like work the way that people have come to expect consumer-grade products to work. And so if you are a PM or you are a designer in a different realm, this is a really, really great place to help out. From the PM aspect, this looks like filtering through those issues and responding to the issues that might not have enough information to try to get more information. So this is, I guess I'd say, be patient. This is kind of the Wild West still. Devs aren't always going to be necessarily open to this idea, but again, it's permissionless. Like, go start organizing things, go write some documentation. Translations is another really great aspect. I'm kind of amazed at how many translations there are. I was asking Vitor, and I wish I had it, but it was an absurd number of translations for Amethyst. I know Damus is in a ton of different languages. Nostr.how, that education site I have, like I said before, is in about 10 languages. If you speak a different language, we need to make Nostr work for everybody, and so we need those languages in all the different apps and clients. And then, like I mentioned, documentation. This stuff really does matter. We need to give people context. We need to tell people why this stuff is different. We need to do it in a lot of different ways because you never know what the piece of content or what the description that's going to make it click for someone is. And so I think it's great that we've got lots of people creating what would on the surface look like roughly the same stuff, but they tell it in a slightly different way. And that's actually really, really, really important. This one's kind of less so. I've kind of come around on this point. I think we actually need to fight for normal user usage less than we are at the time. I want normal users, but I don't want people that I don't want the not early adopter crowd yet. I think all the users we need on Nostr right now are the early adopters who are happy with stuff that's not necessarily polished or working properly. I want people like that also because those are the people that take the time to write documentation or file bugs or try new things. And that's really what we need to do at the most right now is do a lot of experimentation and find more of those early adopters to start messing around with things. Okay, questions? Do we have time for questions? Yeah, okay, cool.
Questions for Mr. Jeff G.
I can't see anything.
No. Right here.
If a project wants to find someone like you to review their code and review their project and make comments and help fix bugs, how would they go about that?
DM me. No, I mean, I think that's actually been one of the really cool things about the community that is being sort of built in real time around Nostr is that everybody is really open, pretty welcoming for the most part. I mean, I know it's intimidating, especially putting stuff into the NIPS repository. It can get shredded to bits. To be honest, you do have to have a bit of thick skin, and people are going to be brusque about how they respond sometimes. Don't take it personally, but I think if people ask for help, they're always going to get it from somewhere. So I think just start pinging people and being like, hey, I know you're busy, but if you've got some time, let's go through this thing.
Other questions?
Hi, Jeff. Nice to meet you. I've been following you on Nostr for a while, so it was great to see this. I'm Lottie, and my question for you is, what would you say is an example of the most constructive type of feedback that you received that you actually think was helpful, and what's more types of feedback that you would like to see to improve Nostr.how?
One specific example. I mean, I think all feedback is really good. I guess the really hard part about building products is figuring out which feedback to listen to and which to ignore, because you're never going to do everything, and so filtering through that's actually the hardest part about building great products. So I think it's always hard for people that give feedback to then see that nothing happens or that it doesn't seem like anything happens. But I guess that's just part of the process. And so I think good feedback always comes with context, and it mostly focuses on what's the problem that I'm actually trying to solve as a user, because that then kind of puts it, puts it in context so that the person building understands does this fit in the realm that I'm trying to build for or not? And then they're probably going to come up with a better solution, even if it's not the one you sort of imagined.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question for Jeff here.
Hey, Jeff, that was great. One thing I didn't see called out on your list of kind of skills for contribution was skills from a business perspective, business model, making it sustainable.
Yes.
So we can all generate those returns Max wants to see.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the role for business-minded folks to contribute?
Yeah, this is actually one of the things that, other than the fact that when I realized that, you could rebuild the entire internet with Nostr, when you think about the business model implications of what a decentralized network that doesn't give, monopoly power to big companies does, you kind of go down a rabbit hole of like, oh God, then what do we do? Like, how are we going to monetize this? Does this even make sense for VC? And I think Max is awesome because he's like a handful of VCs who are like way out there on the edge, and they're like, yeah, I'm totally in for this, even though he has literally no idea where this is all going to go. I think for business-minded people, though, there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be done. And I think a lot of that experimentation needs to have at least like a base level of like rigor to it, right? You need to understand, like, did that thing actually work? Like, was that a failed experiment or, a successful experiment? And so I think, especially, I think it starts to come in a bit later, like once a project has a pretty good user base and is trying to start to figure out, like, what are different ways that we can make money? I think there's, all the standard stuff that we've become very used to, like subscriptions that are going to happen. But I think, given the fact that we've got, virtual money that's streamable in very, very small amounts for almost no fees at light speed, that changes a lot. And we have barely started to scratch the surface of like, what are some other weird models? Like, what's the thing that's going to come after SaaS? I think it's going to look very different, and we certainly haven't found it yet. So I think we need to start experimenting on that more, but it's almost like we've got to get the base level of, apps and users and, things out there first before we can, have the base to experiment on top of.
All right, give it up for Jeff, everybody.
Thank you, guys.